Welcome to the PREP video tutorial on special education, parent rights and responsibilities. During this video, we will inform you of the most relevant policies and procedures in special education and focus on the rights and responsibilities of students and parents who currently receive special education or may qualify for its services. This video tutorial is provided by PREP, the Parental Readiness and Empowerment Program, an initiative of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under Law. The purpose of PREP is to improve student performance, reduce the achievement gap, and provide access to equal educational opportunities. We work to help parents become more involved with their children's education. We provide parent advocacy guides, workshops, educational consultation clinics, and webinars and video tutorials. We also work to ensure that parents have the tools to advocate for their children so that they have access to a quality education and greater educational opportunity. More information can be found on our website at prepparents.org. And remember, we do our best to be accurate, but the law changes all the time, and additional protections may be available in certain states and localities. Section 1 of the Special Education video tutorial will provide an overview of special education laws and statutes and the key words involved. Why might you want to know about these things? Maybe you're curious if there's extra support and resources that could help your child. Maybe your child is already part of a special education program. Or maybe your child's school thinks your child could benefit from special education services. Whatever the case, knowing the laws and key concepts will help you know what's available, what's best, and what rights you have in the process. In Section 2, we'll go over placement in a special education program. In Section 3, we will review the basics of a special education program. And in Section 4, we will go over parent rights and complaint procedures. So let's get started. There are 3 different federal statutes that apply to students with disabilities. We'll discuss the specifics of each one by one. But let's first highlight the major comparisons to keep in mind. Your child may be covered by more than one, so it's helpful to see how you may want to use a different one depending on the situation. The first to know is called the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, or IDEA. IDEA was created with the specific purpose of providing educational benefits for students with disabilities. It's very important for parents to know about IDEA because it provides the most procedural protections to ensure students with disabilities have access to a sound basic education. But it may not always be the most appropriate for every child because its definition of disability is very specific, so a smaller number of students qualify for its protections. Additionally, IDEA protects students at public schools, including charter schools, but may not apply in private school settings. The IDEA applies only at the K-12 level. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 is an anti-discrimination statute that applies to students with disabilities. It provides fewer specific procedural protections than IDEA and is more focused on accommodation rather than procedural protections and can be very effective in ensuring access to educational programs, including extracurricular programs. Section 504 may be more appropriate for a student with disability if his or her disability does not interfere with learning or does not require specialized instruction. Section 504 has a much broader definition of what counts as a disability. As a result, a student who does not qualify for protections under IDEA may very well receive protections under Section 504. Like IDEA, Section 504 applies to students attending public schools, including charter schools. If your child attends a private school, the next statute may be the most helpful. Section 504 applies to K-12 students as well as students in higher education. And finally, we have the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, or the ADA. The ADA is also an anti-discrimination statute that applies to students with disabilities. The ADA was modeled off of Section 504 and also applies to all individuals with disabilities. The big difference is that the ADA protects disabled individuals in many more places, including private institutions. Its protections are quite similar to Section 504, but it covers nearly all schools, with the exception of some religious institutions like churches, and more people. It also has more specific building requirements to make programs accessible to those with disabilities. Like Section 504, the ADA also applies to students in higher education as well as K-12 students. So that provides the big picture, and we'll discuss more of the specifics next. But first, let's make sure we understand some important key concepts. These federal statutes have resulted in a number of common terms, including the ones we'll go over right now. We'll briefly define them and then see how they come up for your child. You'll notice that the terms are generally shortened, so it's good to know the shortened name as well. First, you should know the term a free appropriate education, which is generally referred to as FAPE. Every child is entitled to a free appropriate education at public school free of cost. Students with disabilities are entitled to specialized instruction and related services to make sure they receive FAPE. Related to FAPE, you will hear the term Least Restrictive Environment, or LRE. This phrase refers to a general rule. Whenever possible, students with disabilities are entitled to be educated and participate in educational programs with students without disabilities. You should also be familiar with the term Individualized Education Program, or IEP. Under IDEA, an IEP is a written document created by the school and parent that details how to support your child. It must be approved by the student's parents before the plan goes into action. Related to an IEP, you may hear the term Behavioral Intervention Plan, which is often shortened to BIP. This is a plan that's put into place if a student's behavior is related to his or her disability and negatively affects his or her learning. It's designed to replace a child's negative behaviors with more positive behaviors. For more special education terms related to student behavior, be on the lookout for an upcoming in-depth video tutorial on discipline and special education. Now let's return to the 3 federal laws and statutes we discussed and see how these concepts come up. First, we'll focus on the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. We'll go over both what it is and how it works. Remember, the IDEA provides the most procedural protections to students with disabilities to ensure that they receive FAPE, or a free appropriate public education, in the least restrictive environment, 2 of the most important terms that we just discussed. FAPE's promise to an appropriate education does not mean your child is entitled to the best education. They are entitled to FAPE, which may require something substantively and qualitatively different. And the school must provide any reasonably necessary services to make the education individualized to their needs. Under the least restrictive environment, students with disabilities are entitled to be educated in the same environment as their non-disabled peers. This protects against segregating special education students from non-special education students. So how does the IDEA provide for these rights? Mainly by requiring that whenever a student has a qualifying disability, the school work with the parent to develop an individualized education program, or IEP. Remember, the IEP is a written document created by the school and parents on how to support the child. We'll discuss what the IEP is more in detail in Section 3 of this video tutorial. But also remember, if a student's behavior impairs his or her learning, the IEP might also contain a Behavioral Intervention Plan, or BIP, to interrupt the problematic behaviors and encourage better behaviors. In order for a student to be protected under IDEA, 2 things must be true. First, the student must demonstrate one of the disabilities listed under the IDEA. And second, the disability must negatively affect the child's educational performance. The IDEA recognizes the types of disabilities listed here: autism, emotional disturbances, hearing impairments and deafness, intellectual disabilities, specific learning disabilities such as dyslexia, speech and language impairments, traumatic brain injury, visual impairments, and other health impairments. In addition to having one of these specified disabilities, the child's disability must negatively affect the child's educational performance or ability to learn. The IDEA provides parents with many procedural rights and protections throughout the various stages involved in special education placements. It also establishes a complaint resolution process if parents disagree with the school's recommended placement or services for their child. Later sections of this video tutorial describe these rights in detail. The big takeaway is that the IDEA provides you with the right to have the school follow specific timelines, provide you with specific documents, and receive your consent before certain actions or decisions. Throughout all of these stages, the IDEA provides parents with the right to make complaints or to challenge what is happening. In general, the U.S. Department of Education recommends working with the school to try to address any problems, and particularly recommends mediation. But parents can have their complaints heard in other ways. You as the parent have the right to request an administrative hearing regarding the identification, evaluation, or educational placement of your child. Your local education agency must provide you with information on the complaint procedures. So let's move on to Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1974. It's true that the IDEA offers the most specific procedural protections for students with disabilities. But even if your child's disability doesn't qualify under the IDEA, your child may still be entitled to services and accommodations under Section 504. Section 504 protects against discrimination by requiring the school to give your child the same opportunities as students without disabilities. Under Section 504, FAPE consists of the provision of regular or special education and related aids and services designed to meet the student's individual educational needs as adequately as the needs of non-disabled students are met. In other words, it seeks to level the playing field. It does this by providing such students with a reasonable accommodation or a modification to policies and practices. For example, a school must provide the same opportunities to students in wheelchairs by considering such reasonable accommodations like a ramp or elevator. Or if a student has diabetes and has sugar intake requirements, the school would need to consider modifying its no eating in class policy to allow the student to have a snack midday. Section 504 defines disability in a way that covers more students than the IDEA. Students may qualify for Section 504's protections in 3 different ways, but the first is the most common. The first is showing that the student has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities, including learning. Impairments may include everything from blindness to serious depression to a chronic health issue like diabetes. The second and third way of qualifying, based on a record of such impairment or being regarded to have as such an impairment, are to protect individuals from discrimination when they are not actually disabled, but others are unfairly treating them differently because of their impairment. For example, a student who used to have a chronic illness should not be discriminated against because of his prior medical record. But again, the first qualification is probably the most important for you to remember as parents. This broader definition will cover more students. Not only does it cover those students eligible under IDEA, but it also includes students whose disabilities do not fit within the IDEA's list of disabilities, but still have a limiting impairment. For example, a student with asthma might have a qualifying disability under Section 504 and not under IDEA. The reasonable accommodations requirement allows your child to receive whatever services he needs to accommodate his or her disability while at school. Like IDEA, Section 504 provides many procedural protections to parents, including in the development of the child's 504 plan, which outlines the accommodations or modifications necessary to allow the child to access educational programs or placements. The following sections of this video tutorial will list these rights in more detail. But in considering the different laws, parents have fewer specific rights under Section 504 than IDEA, but important rights still remain. Under Section 504, parents must still be provided notice for any evaluation and placement decisions affecting their children. Parents still need to provide consent for the initial evaluation as well. Section 504 still requires the school to provide services for FAPE, but it does not require a written IEP. In other words, the plan does not have to be formalized in writing, though many schools voluntarily choose to provide Section 504 plans in writing, which are often called Individualized Support Plans, or ISPs. Section 504 also requires reevaluation, but the timeline is less specific and simply has to be periodic. The IDEA has more specific timelines for reevaluations, which must occur at minimum every 3 years. But under both, parents have the right to request a reevaluation at least once a year. Like IDEA, parents also have the right to challenge a school's decisions or actions related to Section 504 services. Again, the U.S. Department of Education recommends mediation as a best practice, but Section 504 also provides you with the right to request a hearing about the identification, evaluation, or educational placement of your child. Section 504 provides for an additional process as well. You may file a complaint with the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights. Let's do a quick recap of the similarities and differences between IDEA and Section 504. IDEA provides more specific procedural protections for students and rights for parents. For example, only IDEA requires that any individualized education program, or IEP, be put into writing and that the parent agree to the IEP. But Section 504 covers more students. It's important to note children who qualify under IDEA's definition of disability will also qualify for Section 504 protections. There are also similarities in what is provided, including services for a free, appropriate education. In terms of rights, both provide various procedural rights throughout the process and opportunities to challenge any determinations. In terms of cost, both services are free to parent and child. And both cover all public schools, including charter schools. If your child attends a private school, they can still be protected under the ADA, which we'll discuss next. If your child receives protections under both IDEA and Section 504, consider which is more appropriate for your child. IDEA may be more appropriate when your child's disability interferes with learning, but Section 504 may be more appropriate when your child's disability requires accommodations but may not negatively impact learning. IDEA-eligible children are also protected by Section 504, but the opposite is not always true. So start by considering whether your child demonstrates one of the specific disabilities listed under IDEA. If they don't demonstrate such a disability, or if they attend a private school, Section 504 or the ADA may still provide important protections. Although generally you'll be using IDEA or Section 504 to advocate for your child, it's still helpful to learn about the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA. As for what the ADA is, it's a civil rights law that is very similar to Section 504. It also prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities. However, it is a helpful law in terms of how it applies because it covers many more places, including private institutions, with some very limited exceptions. So it may be better for students who are attending private school. It may also be more appropriate than IDEA in certain circumstances because it has specific building requirements and requires schools to make programs accessible to disabled parents as well, not just students. The ADA also covers the most individuals. It covers students with disabilities using the same broad definition for disability as Section 504. It also makes it unlawful to discriminate against a person associated with a disabled person, such as a student whose sibling is disabled. As a final note, remember that legal requirements are not the only way to support your child, and sometimes not even the best way. Having a good relationship with your child's school and teacher will allow you to work together to most effectively provide your child with the services they need. Still, sometimes you may need to put more pressure on the school by pointing to your child's legal rights, and you should feel confident in doing so. Schools are often challenged by limited resources and staff time. While it's helpful to respectfully listen to a school's challenges, you should still advocate for what your child deserves under the IDEA, Section 504, and the ADA. If you're struggling to communicate well with your school, we recommend you see our prep videos on parent advocacy and navigating the school system for advice on how to communicate effectively and who to talk to if you're having an issue. Congratulations! You have completed Section 1 of the Special Education video tutorial. Stay tuned for Section 2 on the placement into a special education program.